Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us on this beautiful afternoon. I'm here today with Mike Abel to discuss the launch of his new book, this fascinating and brightly colored book, which is a dive into Mike's business life and experiences and his journey through the advertising industry in South Africa and other countries as well. Mike, thank you very much for joining us today. It's going to be a pleasure chatting to you about some of these stories. Absolutely. Mike, the story about M&C Saatchi Abel goes back, I think, to before you got to Australia. And I think maybe if you could just lay some of the foundations about your journey into advertising, what led you to Australia, and what brought you back.
Perfect. So once I finished studying marketing and then advertising as a postgraduate, I started my first ad agency, funnily enough, during the later years of apartheid in the late 80s with Uncleared Association, where you and I were from. And that was advertised on the back window of back taxis back in the day using vision. And that was an innovation, I guess. And then I was conscripted to the army. And then when I came out, began my search for a career in advertising. And even back then, it was impossibly difficult to get into the industry. And so I did an estate agent's exam while I was in the army at night. And that was our family business in Port Elizabeth on my mom's side. And then eventually landed a job at an agency called the White House, DDB. Worked in Cape Town, very quickly started looking after or running the Woolies account. At the time of the repositioning of Woolies back in the early 90s, was sent to start the agency in Johannesburg as a fully fledged agency at the ripe old age. I think I was about 23 or 24 at the time. And then I joined Ogilvy to work on the VW business. And I worked on VW and Shell and Old Mutual primarily. Ended up running Ogilvy Cape Town at a young age, and then took over running Ogilvy South Africa as the COO in partnership with Nuno Nchingile, who was the CEO. So great career here, loved it. Worked globally on the Ogilvy Brains Trust, used to go frequently to New York, and I was very involved in developing the global integration model for Ogilvy, which was basically looking at one way of reaching a consumer over every touch point. And then in 2008, I'd been with Ogilvy for 15 years, Styli, from the age of 25 to 41. Almost 16 years, and I heard that M&C Saatchi in Australia were looking for a CEO. That approached me, and I was a little antsy at the time in terms of the imminent Zuma presidency. I obviously knew that he came with this illustrious track record of umpteen hundred criminal charges against him at the time, and the thought of him becoming our president, and then coupled with an armed robbery that happened simultaneously and this exciting job offer, I thought it was a pertinent time to take up a new adventure for the family. And I'd worked with the same partners at Ogilvy for many, many years, and I developed close friendships, and many of them went off to do their own things. So, for example, Charles Berger, who was my managing director of the Cape Town agency, went off to Australia to run the Campaign Palace. And Jason Harrison, who's one of my partners, had gone off to the UK to lead the BAT business in that market for Ogilvy. So a lot of the band, funnily enough, broke up around a similar period of time. And so off I went to Australia and was interviewed by Tom Derry and Tom McFarlane, who had started that agency, and they took a liking to the South African. They'd been looking for a long time for a CEO for the M&C Saatchi Group in Australia. It is the largest ad agency group in that region. And they'd looked in the UK, and they'd looked in Australia, and they'd actually looked in the Americas. So it was quite interesting that this Safa, was considered for that position. And then I went across to London, and I had to be interviewed simultaneously by the most famous ad man in the world, Maurice the Lord Saatchi, and 6 other executives and co-founders of the group around the table, and landed the job. And that is how I joined the M&C Saatchi group of companies in 2008, but at the same time kept all of those friendships and relationships alive with all of my partners that I'd worked with for many years at previous agencies.
So there's two parts to that story I want to pick up on, Mike. The first one is, as an industry, looking at it from the outside, or sort of working on the periphery of advertising in the world that we live in and work in. Advertising, or South African advertising, and people in the industry seem to really excel at a global level and do the kind of work that is globally recognized. And I think in your book you mentioned punches way above its weight. Given that we are this small market down here at the bottom of Africa, why do you think it is that South African creative advertising people do so well?
I think an enormous part of it comes from the fact that we are a frontier economy, that we're a new democracy, that we are a diverse culture. And so I think that the way we approach problem solving is unique and fresh and innovative. And if you do look around the world and you look at the South African advertising diaspora, if you like, the executive directors of many of the agencies globally are South Africans. I had the privilege of working with a very brilliant creative director, a man called Robin Putter, who passed away sadly in the beginning of 2009. But Robin was the global creative director of WPP at the time, working from South Africa, but essentially the most influential advertising creative director in the world as a South African. And so there are many examples of how we problem solve creatively. Even jumping forward today, Styli, if you have a look at some of the greatest artists in the world that are shaking up the industry, you look at Nelson Makamo and what he's doing, hanging on the walls of the houses of Oprah Winfrey and Giorgio Armani and Trevor Noah and Beyonce. You have a look at Laduma with his Makosa brand. You have a look at DJ Black Coffee and how he's innovating in music and playing at the biggest clubs in Ibiza. I think South Africans problem solve. Look at Elon Musk. There's a great example of a South African that has a steadfast refusal to accept the status quo. So I don't think it's just the ad industry. I think it's South Africans' ability to problem solve and think freshly. And that is forged, I guess, by a multicultural and diverse background.
Yeah, and I guess solving problems is really what the basis of being an entrepreneur and being in advertising is about, right? There's a business challenge, there's a problem that needs to be solved, there's needs that needs to be addressed, there's a job that needs to be done. And I think in a place of, I guess, enough problems and enough jobs to be done, the only way that you can progress is through creative and innovative problem solving, and we certainly have enough of those to go around. The other thing I wanted to
and taking without blowing smoke up the proverbial of the Daily Maverick, I think that's what you guys have done yourselves in your space. And if you have a look today at having launched a newspaper at a time when everything's gone digital, you've gone back to analog to reach an audience and to provide fresh content. And if you have a look at the fact that you almost had to create something to solve South Africa's problems, because it was the independent media and innovators and entrepreneurs like yourselves that kind of ended the state capture project, as opposed to the traditional media. So I think even in that space, it's been about innovation and approaching problem solving in a fresh way.
I read recently a report that said the most important factor that determines the success of a startup or a venture is timing. To the extent that 45% of the success factor is down to the timing of when that business starts relative to its macro environment or its competitive environment. So starting a business like we did in 2009 around that time, 2010 was the official launch of M&C Saatchi Abel, that wasn't the best time to be starting something. So for you guys to get to where you are today and to fight against that wind, which is so important to getting a new business up and off the ground, I think it's testament to how you guys decided to do things quite differently when setting up a new ad agency.
Yeah, I think that sometimes the worst time is the best time. And when people are feeling down and despondent, when an industry is often overtraded and lacks innovation and lacks self-confidence, for a newcomer to come in there with a new model, with innovation, is the perfect opportunity, I think, to unlock an industry. And there's that saying that there may be a gap in the market, but is there a market in the gap? And I think a lot of people try and start their businesses where there isn't a market in the gap. And as clever as their idea may be, if there isn't a market, then there isn't an opportunity. I mean, it might be niche and it might be exciting, but, I don't know if you've read the book by Bob Iger, the global CEO of Disney, called Ride of a Lifetime. And in that book, he says he had a very early lesson where somebody said to him, because he had bought this a very famous female magazine publication, and the guy said to him, his boss at the time, just be wary of being the best trombone oil manufacturer in the world, because even if you are the market leader, there is only demand for 5 liters of trombone oil. So I think the way we went into it is to assess, size, scope the market, determine that there was a meaningful opportunity for another great communications agency on the African continent. And if you look at the digital world today, and particularly in the COVID world, to unlock a global opportunity really for an agency like ours and to compete globally, not just nationally or on the continent. And then the other thing is cash flow. A lot of people, when they start a business, start with a dream and they start even with a plan. But unless you have the requisite cash flow for takeoff, because you don't know how long that runway is going to be. And, I use the plane analogy often. So how do you how does a plane take off? With headwinds, not tailwinds. Okay. So headwinds are a great opportunity for growth because you adjust your flap for liftoff. And then you have to have the cash and you have to have the talent. So unless you've got the best people to start that business with, and you've got a clear plan and you've got cash in the bank, don't start the business.
Mike, having good people in the business is just part of the solution, right? Because a lot of businesses and even a lot of ad agencies have great talent. And you identified the band players that you wanted to bring back into this venture. You recognized that you needed more capital and that having a smaller percentage of a much bigger opportunity was what attracted you to, not doing a Mike Abel and Friends type in environment, which is how you named it in the book. But you also needed to change the dynamic of how those good people work and the model that hadn't really been done before, hadn't been done much in the ad industry. And I was quite interested to hear how that was quite different to how other and most ad agencies were structured.
Yeah, that's correct, Styli. So most ad agencies around the world operate, I guess, the style of model from a visual point of view, not from a Ponzi scheme, is a pyramid. And you've got the CEO and you've got the executive creative director at the top, and then everybody cascades beneath them. And what I'd seen and taken inspiration from in terms of how I'd worked with my own team, I'd never worked in a triangle model. I'd only worked in a rectangle model this way, where there is a team of partners, very much the way an accounting firm works, or a legal practice, or an architectural firm. We have a lot of really talented people that collaborate and work together to problem solve. And it brings a number of different things together. One is it's not a race to get to the top, because there are a number of you that are sharing that space already. So you don't need to wait for somebody to leave or die in order to get that job. Also, it allows people a high level of independence, a high level of collaboration. It's a flat structure. It's not a fear-driven structure. And so as long as you can get talent on board, you can broaden that rectangle as opposed to everybody jostling for position for one of those top 2 jobs. So that model has worked incredibly well for us. And the other thing that you referred to is it's far better to own a small part of something extraordinary than a large part of something ordinary. So you look at a brilliant entrepreneur like an Adrian Gore. What is 1% of Discovery Health worth today? I think it's worth about R1 billion. For 1% of that company, as opposed to Adrian owning maybe 100% of a company that's worth 100 million rand. And I think that what we've said is, as a number of partners, we wanted to create something of scale, If you look at the MNC Saatchi Abel group of companies today, we've got 8 companies in our group, all owner operators. Everybody that leads the company has meaningful skin in the game. And we're building something of scale. I mean, we're only 10 years old. And if I look at where the company is today, it's the beginning of our journey. We're babies.
Yeah, and if I can just add that, from the outside and having had interactions with you and your team over the years, to try and help us with some of our business challenges and solve some of our problems, there's 2 things have kind of stood out that kind of speak to that model is working from the outside. And the first one is that, almost every engagement that we've had is that you guys seem happy. You're happy to be there, happy to be working with each other, having fun, doing great work, being creative. And that's just the vibe that we get, that the environment is a happy one. And I think that, how the organization is designed and structured, plays a part in that. And that the turnover, especially at that level, is almost non-existent. I think, if I'm not mistaken, almost all the co-founders who were there at the 100%. Beginning are still here 10 years later, which is quite incredible to see.
Yeah. So I think the reality, or why that has come to the fore, is our model is: do we know them? Do we like them? Do we trust them? Do we have aligned ambition? Do we play to people's strengths, not to their weaknesses? Do we get behind people if they aren't good at one area, but unbelievably powerful in another area? And so I think a lot of corporates, and we're not a corporate, we don't behave like a corporate, but by definition, people might look at us and say, yes, they are. But we are really a federation of entrepreneurs, and we're a collaboration of friends, and we really enjoy spending time together. Also, what we had noticed in our model when we started the industry is what happens is, traditionally an agency will win an account, we'll work with the Daily Maverick. You might meet a Mike Abel in the first meeting, or a Jason Harrison, or now Mashiach, or whoever it might be, and then you don't see them again, because now you've landed the business. And our whole model is, because we love problem solving and because we love coming up with solutions, we are the people on the field playing the game. We are the players. So I use an older analogy, but as I always say, is we don't have Alex Ferguson in our company. There's nobody on the side of the field with a whistle shouting. You're either on the pitch playing the game, or you're out the stadium. And so we love problem solving, because the reality of having a successful client agency relationship starts with problem verification. It's quite easy to look for a solution, but how do you know you've actually identified and solved the problem properly? And that is the most exciting part for us. And so we love scrumming together, getting in a room with our clients, wrestling over problems, co-creating solutions. We also don't believe in a traditional or old model of the cloche, where you give us a brief and we disappear, and then you come back to the agency, and then we have that kind of ta-da moment where we lift the terrain. By the time we lift that terrain, you should know exactly what's underneath it, because you should have been part of the problem-solving process. And that is why our relationships are robust with one another and with our clients, is because it is one of fun, it is one of safety, and it is one of co-creation.
So now, just going back to the early days, Mike, we've got we've got the funding, we've got the people, we've got the structure, we've got the vision, and we've got this tough, difficult trading environment to start things off. Now, it might be easy to look here and go 10 years later, loads of awards, loads of billing, loads of art on the wall, and to say, that this is this linear, successful line from beginning to this great success today. But it wasn't that easy, was it? Especially in the beginning, even with having all those good building blocks in place, you're still having to break into a market and prove yourselves, despite your collective history and accomplishments in the industry, and struggle to kind of get through that first year, to break through and to get those accounts that necessary to get that lift off that a new business and new ad agency needs. What was that like going through that? I think Paul Graham calls it the trough of sorrow or the abyss of sorrow for entrepreneurs and startup founders.
Yeah, I think it was an incredibly difficult time. I had hopelessly underestimated the environment that I would encounter from the industry when I came back to South Africa. I mean, when I ran Ogilvy, and if people left the company at the time to start their own agencies, I would wish them well. And if people or potential clients approached us to work with us and there was conflict business, I'd actually help those agencies succeed and push business that way. And so I was quite astonished to encounter, I guess, from most agencies, there were some agencies like a King James that sent me champagne, or a Graham Warsop at the Jupiter Drawing Room, and that were kind. But I guess I had totally underestimated the level of hostility from my alma mater and the WPP group when I opened it. I didn't anticipate that at all. And the lack of generosity of spirit, where people were predicting on social media all the time of our demise. It was the wrong time to start a company. It wouldn't succeed. And then you'd phone up clients where some of the clients had actually even worked for you, and you had great relationships with them. And you'd say, "Hi, it's Mike. I'm back in South Africa. Love to work with you guys. Is there maybe a little project that you could give us?" And I would literally get things like, "Mike, we know you're good, but how good is your agency? If you guys do succeed and it does go well, then we'll give you a project." And I was, well, if everybody says that to me, how will I get the opportunity to succeed? So it was brutally tough. And I think really what you need, Styli, is those little moments of affirmation and to draw on it. So somebody who might have wanted to work with you before and might have not had the budget potentially when you ran a big agency might give you a project and say, "Well, would you like to work on this with us? Or would you like to work on that?" And then it literally took 18 months until we landed our first big account, which was Heineken, South Africa. And we had an unbelievably successful partnership with them, where we led them to, in partnership, to being kind of spontaneously mentioned in the Brands and Branding Survey, the top beer brand. And when we started on Heineken, globally, South Africa was not even in the top 20. And when we parted ways at the beginning of this year, it was in the top 4 globally in the volume market. So you kind of have a look and you say, well, like, how do we hold on? And, how do you just break into the market with bigger balls? So basically, I think if you look at us in Johannesburg, when we opened the Johannesburg agency in, I think I rented those premises in May 2009. 2010, May 2010. We went to Joburg. We knew we had to be in Joburg. We fully branded the agency. We fully kitted it out. We signed a 40,000 Rand a month lease for 5 years. And then we locked the door and flew back to Cape Town. And at the same time, I was trying to persuade Jacques Burger to return from Australia, having politely declined me originally, but I am a persistent and determined man. And I knew it was the right career move for Jacques, even if he wasn't prepared to acknowledge that at the time for himself. And I'm sure if he's watching this, he's chuckling, because I do remind him of that. Anyway, but I knew that Jacques was the right person to run and lead our Joburg agency. So we'd fly up once a week or every 2 weeks. We'd open the Joburg agency. We would host a potential client meeting. We'd lock the door and fly back to Cape Town. Now, that could have gone horribly wrong. And when I look back on those moments, I do think to myself, Mike, were you utterly mad? But I think at that moment in time, you do need to have that conviction and belief that what you're doing is right and it will pay off, and that you have the right partners, which we did in the PLC in London, who bought into our strategy. That what we were trying to do was to build this international airport that would eventually land Dreamliners. But you don't start landing them immediately. You do start landing those little Cessnas and Piper Cubs until the big planes realize that they can land there safely.
Mike, you mentioned Heineken. You've also worked with some other great South African brands as well. Takealot, you guys have an extremely close relationship with them since the beginning, and been a big part of the success of what is now this behemoth e-commerce player in a country where there's, even to this day, still some trepidation about online transactions. And so I can only imagine what that was like, 10 years ago, trying to sort of get past those initial those initial reservations about transacting and buying things online, very different to our perceptions today. What was that like in the beginning? I guess also that relationship and how you get to become that integral partner almost. It seems like you guys are more than just this service supplier to them.
Very much so, Styli. So if you have a look at the forward to my book, it's actually written by Kim Reed, who's the founder and CEO of takealot.com, because we've really been on this journey together since inception. So Kim approached me. We had worked together when I was running Ogilvy, and he was the managing director of MWeb. And so he was my client, and he knew me then, and we had a great relationship. And then he approached me and he said, Mike, I bought this tiny e-tailer operating out of the northern suburbs in Cape Town called Take-Two. And they sell CDs and books, but I have a vision of turning this into the greatest e-tailer, e-commerce company, really, on the African continent. And knowing Kim, I knew that a man of that intellect and vision would be able to pull it off. He just wanted some trusted partners around him. So he and I and a couple of the guys sat down and we scrummed around it. And, I spoke just now about problem verification. And the first thing was, how do you create awareness, I guess, for Take-Two? And Kim wanted to change the name of the company and, kind of considered, why Take-Two when you can take a lot? So I think we broadened what people will come and shop and the size of basket just in that. And then we did a full basket analysis of what the Take-Two shopper was currently doing. So we looked at that data, we did a deep dive, and we thought, what kind of insight could we extrapolate and dig out of that data? And what was the propensity or likelihood to cross-shop? So how did we take people from being a book shopper or a CD shopper into buying maybe a laptop or into buying something different? So how are we going to grow the category, and what insight could we get from that? The key problem, so if you had to say to Phil Knight of Nike, who is Nike's enemy? Phil Knight would not say Reebok or Adidas or Puma or New Balance. He'll say apathy. If we can get more people off the couch and moving, then we'll be able to sell more shoes. So Kim and I and the team looked at what is the key problem or the key enemy really of Takealot. And the key enemy is instant gratification. When people want something, they want it now. Now, their biggest competitor at the time, they subsequently absorbed them, was Kalahari. If you ordered something off Kalahari, it would take you 7 to 10 days to get that item. So what we needed to do was to solve instant gratification. So I had a small client in the agency at the time called Mr. D, Mr. Delivery. So I phoned up the CEO of Mr. D, a guy called David Chart, and I said to David, Dave, tell me what happens when all of your drivers aren't delivering Nando's, client punt there, for lunch or for supper? What do they do during the day? And he said, it's a problem for us. They're pretty quiet. So I said, well, I'd like to introduce you to Kim Reed, because I think that you guys could have a great conversation about maybe how to keep those drivers busy when they're not delivering Nando's, how they could be delivering TV sets and tennis rackets and tackies. And so Kim met with them, they got along well, and they acquired Mr. D. So overnight, they had a distribution solution that could deliver products to people within 24 hours. And that was the silver bullet for unlocking e-commerce for them in South Africa. And then to grow a trusted and desirable brand. And as you say, even today, one of the friction factors is a low level of trust in terms of buying online when the world is buying online, when the most valuable company in the world today, being Amazon, is an e-commerce play. And I think we're going to see massive growth in that space, because why stand in a queue at the mall when you can be at your pool and have it delivered to you?
Especially in these times as well, with all the additional risks that are existing today. Mike, I want to 100%. Jump into some of the other great campaigns and clients that you've worked with, but I also want to just pick up a question from the audience and pose a question to the audience too. We had someone submit in a question earlier, ask you what keeps you up at night, and how do you deal with that? What are the things that are keeping you up at night? So that's your question. While you get to think about that in a second, I have a question for the audience. And being as this is an ad man and an ad man story, is what piece of advertising have you recently engaged with or encountered that caused you to take some kind of action? Not necessarily buy something, but maybe something else. And I'd like to hear from our audience, what brand was it and what was the action? And you can just post those answers and type that comment into the chat, and then Mike and I will pick up and riff on some of those. But Mike, what keeps you up at night? What are the things that stress you out or frustrate you, that cause you to lose sleep? And how do you deal with that?
I'm pleased you stopped yourself from saying losing hair, because you and I are not equally blessed in that space. I keep on dropping my headphones, so forgive me. Hope you can hear me still. So what keeps me up at night is a 52% youth unemployment rate in South Africa and a 30+ unemployment general rate in South Africa. And as you know, some of the articles I've written for your publication, Daily Maverick, and for many other publications that I've spoken around, is my obsession with how do we create more of an inclusive economy, more of a sharing culture, redress the inequities of the past, in parallel to, I guess, what has happened in our country with the state capture project, with a government seemingly being not that interested in solving the big problems of the day, funding, I guess, what I would consider SOEs that don't require funding but require privatization. I wish the unions would get their heads around the fact that by running a successful privatized company, you create more jobs than sustaining a defunct SOE. So what keeps me awake at night is trying to make a difference. Now, people say to me, Mark, you know, you're very outspoken against government. I'm not outspoken against government. I'm trying to fix stuff, Styli. And I think that being a patriot is about talking truth to power and about trying to fix stuff. So when I write a letter to President Ramaphosa to say, you know, you've asked for us to get behind your Tumamina project, we're here, we're waiting, we're trying to fix this. Active citizenry is what's going to fix South Africa. Entrepreneurs, people in business, people focused around filling potholes, fixing unemployment, creating job opportunities, and not just looking towards government to fix it. Now, government needs to get their act together and to collaborate with business that has the solutions to help fix and build South Africa. Now, there has to be the will and there has to be the intent. So the thing that keeps me up at night is absolutely, how do I play a role and how do I encourage other people to play a role in active citizenry, in growing our economy, in collaborating around solutions and building this magnificent country of ours. I mean, we are in here, we are deeply vested, we are deeply invested, and we just want to play our role in trying to fix this country, which has got all of the potential in the world. There is no reason on earth that South Africa finds itself in this low growth situation other than incompetence, because we've got the talent, we've got the people, we've got the resources, it's all here. But what we have to do is we have to stop corruption dead in its tracks. We have to put the right people in the right jobs where they can contribute. And we have to fight against unemployment, grow the economy, and we have to contribute towards meaningful education and healthcare and turn this country around. And that is what obsesses me.
Yeah, Mike, and it's been such a treat to see those columns come through and be published on our pages. I think not only for the sense and the suggestions and the solutions that are being proposed, but also to have an authentic voice in business who's willing to speak up and call out what's going on. And I think, you know, some of the conservatism, the fence sitting that you experienced in the early stages of your business, you know, trying to build, you know, is played out in other parts of that, where we see business not having a loud enough voice and standing up and just, you know, either putting up their hands or going with whatever's going on without sort of saying, hey, we're not okay with that, this needs to change. Yeah, and so thank you for that, and thank you for your contributions. And I hope that, you know, more business leaders take inspiration from what you've done and can see that you can have that kind of voice, you can have those opinions, and still be, you know, a successful business owner, a successful participant in the business community, because business doesn't operate in a silo. This thing that operates on the side apart from the rest of society. It's part of the community. And I think that's what our business leaders need to recognize, is that they can't just think they can carry on making profits in their own world and not worry about what the rest of the country experiences in terms of hardship and the low growth and the unemployment problems.
Absolutely, Styli. And sorry, just to pick up on that, I don't see where the downside exists in trying to help fix the country and proffer solutions. I think keeping your head beneath the parapet as a business strategy to grow a country is idiocy. Why would you not use your voice to try and fix the country that you live in, that you work in, and that the people who work for you live in? I think it's a matter of conscience. I don't think it's a matter of choice.
Yeah, and we don't. I think the more people that get involved and engaged in that and realize that the better we can be at building things and creatively solving these problems. Mike, there's been a question in the chat from Tim Richmond, who you know, as publisher of your book, talking about how changing habits with the rise of streaming, for example, has reduced the amount of TV advertising that he's watching in his personal capacity. And I think a lot of people are experiencing that. How does that problem influence, I guess, what you guys do for a living? What does the disruption look like for you? Every industry, every business gets disrupted. How do you go about future-proofing your business within the challenges of future-proofing your industry?
I think that's a great question from Tim. If you are a channel-led advertising agency, you've got a very big problem. So if you're a customer-led ad agency, then you'll be fine with the shifting of channels and the moving away from traditional television, if you like, to people curating their bespoke content. So what I mean by that is, also as an ad agency, we are not brand focused, we're customer focused, because if you look at the customer and how they live their lives, you can intersect your client's brand at the perfect moment in their life where it's relevant and where it's resonant. If you're brand focused, it's very easy to lose the customer and just to be obsessed around the brand. So why a client comes to M&C Saatchi Abel is for 3 reasons, or this is the 3 reasons I tell them they should come to us. How are we going to grow your top line? How are we going to grow your market share? How are we going to grow your brand equity? Okay. And you're going to do that by being able to solve people's problems emotionally or practically better with your clients' brands than the competitor brands. So that doesn't talk about television or radio or print or outdoor anywhere. So our orientation is to be able to solve problems in a very meaningful way that builds trust and builds bonds and builds relationships transactionally between customers and brands. So if it means creating a content piece, if it means having a webinar, if it means new packaging, if it means a new distribution model, whatever it is, that's how we look at problem solving. So our revenue stream as an agency does not come from making TV ads. It comes from problem solving meaningfully for our clients.
And I think an extension of that is what Jeremy is asking here as well, with regards to the impact of social media and the Googles and Facebooks of the world. There has been this almost rush that that's how businesses are going to grow. But that's just such a tiny slice of what businesses can use to solve their business problems. And I think the approach that you're talking about is, it's not even whether advertising is the right solution to the problem, is, you know, what is the business problem and how can we solve that in whatever way is the most relevant.
Yeah, that's right. So, you know, advertising agencies, you know, obviously it's interesting to see, you know, the growth of search and certainly the role that the Googles play in that space, a dominant role, and the control that they have. And certainly if you have a look at the Facebooks of this world and, you know, even how they can determine the content that you get to see and what you get to engage with. I think the election that's on the go right now, an example as well in terms of, you know, what these social media platforms, and I'm sure most people have watched The Social Dilemma, and if they haven't, they should. But for us, it's really about building interesting relationships between brands and customers. And I look at that work and I say, is the work relevant? Is it original? Is it impactful? Those three acronyms, which I haven't coined at all, equals ROI, return on investment. And so, yes, of course, Google is going to play their role in search and how people find brands and interact with brands. But people don't live their lives on a computer. People live their lives in the world. And so there are many different ways of reaching customers, engaging in conversation. And if you have a look at these new platforms, one of them being a client of ours being TikTok, you know, people gravitate to content themselves. They find content themselves. You know, there's that wonderful, I can't remember what this berry drink is, but Fahim Chowdhury, who's our MD of our Johannesburg agency, was showing it in a staff meeting where this guy went to work the other day and his car broke down. I don't know if you've seen this, Styli, and he hops onto a skateboard and he hitches a lift behind this truck and he's drinking this berry juice to Rumours by Fleetwood Mac. And by the time he checked in on his TikTok account at 10 o'clock in the morning, he already had over 2 million views of him hitching a ride on the back of the truck. And the sales of this drink had started to rocket already, and Rumours had entered into the top 10 on the hit list of Apple Music. Now, that is just a consumer creating their own content and having fun with it. And for brands, and agencies, it's how do we engage in it? How do we build in it? Because build on it. It's not about rejecting it and saying, oh my God, that doesn't come from the ad agency. What do we do now? It's like saying, wow, that's amazing. That's what the kind of content that consumers want from brands. Let's play more in that space. How do we get on board? How do we drive that enthusiasm more? And I think that ad agencies or any businesses that are insecure in that space are going to fail. It's about spotting those opportunities and embracing them and rolling with them, as opposed to fighting against them and feeling like that's going to eat your lunch. If you're worried about it eating your lunch, it's going to eat your lunch. Rather sit down at the table and share your lunch with them.
Well, talking about eating your lunch, that's a perfect segue into, it'll be impossible to have a discussion with you guys and your clients and not to mention the Nando's relationship you guys enjoy this. I mean, it's probably considered the most lucrative or the most sought after account in the South African ad world. And, you go into it quite a bit in the book. I think also just laying how you and your team have this frank and honest and great working relationship with Jeff White and the CEO and Doug Place, the CMO. What's it been like working on that account, which has had this, and there's almost this expectation that their ads need to, or their work needs to be in a certain space or attacking a certain angle. How do you grapple with that in terms of also trying to sell more chicken?
Yeah. So it's a wonderful relationship. It's a very high trust relationship, and it also goes back many, many years. You know, where Jeff was my client at SAB Miller, he was a client of mine, as was Doug at Cadbury Mondelez, and then when they decided to put their account out to pitch at Nando's, we pitched for it against a number of other agencies, and when we won it, a lot of people viewed it, rightfully so, as a bit of a poison chalice because they had such a famous advertising history already. And, I've got a great relationship as well with Robbie Brosen, who's an amazing man and visionary. And people said, well, how's M&C Saatchi Abel just going to continue that legacy? And the reality is the business had other challenges. It reminded me a little bit of the days of when I used to work on Castrol, and we won the Castrol account. And Castrol at the time, you'll recall, was very famous for the Bout and Soir campaign. And what they weren't doing was selling a lot of oil, but people loved the brand. And so we looked at the business and we thought it's one thing people loving a brand, but you need to be buying from that brand. You need to be attracting new audiences, and you need to be able to look where growth exists. And so what I did with the team around Castrol at the time is we totally repositioned the brand around a proposition called liquid engineering, and we spoke to the intrinsic and extrinsic benefits of why Castrol was a better oil. And that was very much the challenge that Jeff and then later Doug gave to us. But when we pitched Jeff and Mike, who were the clients at the time, they said to us, there are 4 million Nando's customers that just don't know they're Nando's customers yet. And how do we get them to know that they are Nando's customers? So our role was to look at continuing that rich advertising history and legacy, but also to start attracting a new customer to Nando's for getting people to taste it, to trial it, to buy it repeatedly, and to sell a lot more chicken. And so that was the challenge. And so we didn't believe that there was any trade-off whatsoever in doing hot advertising that people loved, but also persuading them to buy Nando's delicious flame grilled chicken. So our job was to do both. And so how do you introduce innovation? How do you bring new products online in a way? So if you have a look at the way we launched churros with Nando's. So for example, I don't know if you saw those billboards that people loved and engaged in. And the billboard basically said something like, churros, it's like a cook sister that just went to a private school. And people love that kind of stuff. And so whatever we do with Nando's, we like to elicit a conversation, we like to elicit engagement, and we obviously like to elicit a trial.
And I guess to be able to tap into, and there have been times when you guys have responded to current events and have been quite quick to get stuff out, whether either through social media or to even get an ad out into the world. You guys have to move quite quickly, and there has to be quite a high level of trust in order to be able to capitalize on the moment with Nando's and with the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. So Nando's is a brand that has to move, all of our clients do, but particularly Nando's, at the speed of culture. So when I say that, even what's going down on a daily basis. So one of the bravest things that we did was in the heart of the state capture project, where we could predict the dying days of the Zuma presidency, if you can call it that, and the Guptas and their influence from Saxonwald, we created an ad called "In South Africa, We Fix Our Shit," which is true. South Africa has always fixed our shit, and it's always been the citizens of the country that have fixed our shit. So back to hashtag active citizenry. And we called out in our ad that the Guptas were going to skedaddle from South Africa, and we showed them at the end of the ad getting into their black Range Rover, which they actually did drive. We didn't know it at the time because 2 or 3 weeks later, we saw those black Range Rovers heading towards the airport. I don't know which Air Force base they took off from. A question in and of itself for another time. I'll leave that to Paulie van Wyk to solve that one. But we called that the Guptas were going to run away from South Africa, and Nando's as a brand had the balls to call it and to say that we're going to fix our shit, and that these guys are going to leave. And so the brand has always been able to do that. We took a really brave stand creatively around our ad, which is called Afrotising, where we said South Africa has got a genre of advertising that they're playing into now of smoke bombs and a style of voice and a style of music that is not authentically South African. And South Africa has got many flavors to it. And where, again, the extrinsic plays into the intrinsic. And we called it around, is this the type of stuff that represents South Africa? Because we believe we're much richer than that. And South Africa resonated very powerfully with that, as it did with the You People ad, where we spoke to stereotypical behavior and how people point fingers at one another. And we like to unlock and find attention. We call it the voice of the people and understanding the voice of the people, which we did with our Mzansi Poli board game, where we spoke to all of that. And then it eventually ends up with a guy who can play. He's got the race card, so he's going to win this game. And so it's really about understanding that dynamic and playing to it.
Mike, I want to take 1 or 2 more questions from the audience, and it's amazing how quickly our time has gone in this chat. It's been amazing to chat to you. But this question from Hubert: how does a small business afford an ad agency where they don't have mega budgets? What do they do? And maybe not necessarily, it might not be the right time or the opportunity. But how did small businesses grow? How did they market themselves? How did they take the lessons from what you guys do from some bigger clients, and how did they get a foot in the door?
So it is really difficult for clients that don't have meaningful budgets or any budgets really to tap into a broader audience. But, I have just used that example of, I don't know if it's Ribena or whatever that juice was, where they created really hot content. Now, what a small business might want to do is to go online and have a look on YouTube at something called the Dollar Shave Club. Now, the Dollar Shave Club designed an ad, the CEO, it was basically a very cheap razor. They thought that the big companies were ripping the arse out of the razor business, and they were going to offer a very cheap, affordable razor and a high quality one. And so they developed an ad for the Dollar Shave Club, which is shot in a studio. It's not an expensive production. It happens to be particularly brilliant. But I think they've had 26 million views of the Dollar Shave Club television commercial because it's actually just funny content. And I think Unilever bought them for over $1 billion about 2 years ago. And people aren't that necessarily interested in what is important, Styli. They're interested in being entertained. So what I always say is, Stephen Hawking, the late Stephen Hawking, speaks about man, civilization, God, and our future on this planet as a species. Over a 5-year period, about 1.5 million people watched that. Over that same 5-year period, 700 million people watched Miley Cyrus coming in on a wrecking ball, and over 26 million people watched a Dormouse snoring in a girl's hand, and 2 billion people watched Psy's Gangnam Style. So if you are relevant and if you are entertaining, you can attract people. So today, smaller businesses have these amazing platforms of Instagram and of YouTube and of TikTok and, all of these opportunities to engage with their customers in a low cost and innovative way. So I think it's not about bemoaning it, but saying, how do I become that company? How do I believe in my business? How do I invest in my business? Because they say doing business without advertising is like winking at a girl in the dark. You know what you're doing, but nobody else does. And it's an old saying, but it's a truism. So you have to go out there and you have to be noticed. And other advice I have for small companies, great advertising is about making the strange familiar, and the familiar strange. So people don't know who you are, tell them who you are. Tell them who you are in a fresh way. Or if people already know who you are and aren't interested in who you are, tell them who you are in a very interesting way. And I think that's the way to look at it. So as I said, make the strange familiar and make the familiar strange.
Mike, there's a question from Jonathan Glackman here, and I think maybe we can use it as a way to sort of end up the conversation, or to end the conversation here, which has been fascinating. But I think looking forward, the book tells these great stories about the past and getting to this moment, and the successes and the challenges and everything that you guys had to go through. But looking forward, what are the biggest disruption challenges facing you and your business and your industry, and how are you guys looking at future-proofing yourselves around that? Jonathan mentions a lot of the big corporates taking their ad agency functions in-house. We've talked about social media, the impact of that, and the streaming. What are you guys going to be doing to future-proof your business as you look forward?
Look, it's an incredibly relevant question. And I always believe that you should, whichever business or company is going to take out your industry, rather buy that business and be ahead of the curve in that regard. And so you see consulting firms, trying to buy ad agencies. You see Accenture, for example, buying Droga 5, because Accenture realizes that they might be very good at problem definition, but how good are they at solution creation or coming up with big ideas? So for an agency like ours, we already play in the problem-solving space. Now, our job, as I said, is to build enduring relationships between brands and customers. That's our job. And as long as we can play in that space, we will be relevant. So You got to look at AI. What kind of a role is that going to play in disrupting and ad agencies and being able to create ads via artificial intelligence and computers? I don't believe that AI is close to being in the creative space, idea generation. So I think that protects us. We need to be able to stay relevant on multi-platforms, irrespective of how we engage with customers. So if you have a look at the different challenges that media is facing and how customers are moving away from places where they see ads, how are you going to be relevant? How are you going to engage with those customers? There are many ways of reaching customers outside of traditional media. There's a lot of non-traditional and unconventional media and events and activations and sport and who knows. And we'll play in all of those spaces through the PR space, through the content development space. So I think that if I look at the industry, there are many opportunities between the cracks for us to continue to remain relevant as an industry and to grow and to understand those challenges. So not in any way to Jonathan's question to say those aren't very real challenges. But for me, it's about saying, how do I develop the most talented and future-focused team? Because what most companies do when in their hiring, Styli, to get back to an earlier question you asked me, is when you hire, most people think, who is available and what CVs do I have? They don't think like old Pep, who's trying to build his soccer team and say, actually, who is the best player in the world that I want on my team? And I'm going to go and fetch that best player, because unless I have that striker, I'm not going to win the game. So for us as MNC Saatchi Abel, what we look at is who are fresh problem solvers, who are innovative thinkers. Do I need to be hiring architects in my company? Do I need to be hiring fashion designers? Do I need to be hiring magazine editors? Do we hire journalists? Because what is relevant to us in growing resonance between brands and customers, we will play. So I'm not going to be dissuaded or thrown off course by any of the decoys or shuris or whatever they might be of where it's all going. My single-minded focus is how do I build those enduring relationships and how do I stay relevant irrespective of the channels and the challenges that exist in terms of customers living their lives. Because the truth is, Styli, that people don't change. And what I mean by people don't change is the enduring themes of human nature, the need to be loved, the need to feel affirmed, something to do, something to look forward to, as Viktor Frankl says in Man's Search for Meaning. Those are the things that are perennial themes in human nature. And as long as we can understand those themes and remain relevant to them and play into them, lean into the problem as opposed to shying away from the problem, we will have a rich and robust industry.
Mike, I think that's an incredibly insightful passage to end the discussion on. I wanted to let you know that I thoroughly enjoyed reading the book. It was such a great and interesting read. I read it in one session. I think also because we've had our interactions over the years and the names are familiar to me in the book, and to just kind of fill in the pieces of your story that I didn't know, it was a great couple of hours to spend some time and to go through it. But more than the insightful stories that are in the book as well, I also quite loved the cover, the choice of the cover, and the Lego theme that you guys went with. I mean, bright cover, obviously to stand out in the bookshops, but also I think the Lego being quite symbolic, I think, of what you guys have done, building this organization, this movement, this force, and doing it creatively, doing it innovatively. I think what Lego also represents is fun. And I think that sort of sums it up. So congratulations on the book, on the cover, on the stories, on the decade, and here's to many more.
Thank you, Styli. Thank you very much. Great to chat with you. And above anything, I want the book to be useful, to help people who are thinking about their lives, thinking about the country, thinking about their businesses, to read the book and to find fresh solutions. So thank you for that.
And thank you for joining us today. Thank you for our audience members who participated in the chat. Thanks for the questions. If we didn't get to all the questions today, I'm really sorry. You can send those through and we'll try and get them answered for you. And thank you to everyone who joined us today. And to the team behind this who've made this possible. A lot of hard work and preparation goes into this, and to everyone who was involved in the book.
Thank you, Styli. Great to chat. Thank you to everyone who joined us today. It's been a pleasure.